The morning they left, they hugged me like everything was normal. "Just a quick work trip," my daughter-in-law said, brushing my hair behind my ear like I was a child. "You're our rock, Mom. Watch the house while we're away." I smiled, nodding, though something in my chest tightened. I didn't ask questions. I never do. That's what gets you labeled a burden. After all, I was lucky to live with them, at least that's what everyone kept reminding me. At 78, widowed, with aching joints and a pension that barely covered my prescriptions, I should have been grateful. Grateful for the room upstairs. Grateful for the leftovers. Grateful for the silence that swallowed my days. They left before dawn. I stood by the window as their car disappeared down the street. I waited all day. No call, no text. That night, I made myself a bowl of instant noodles and ate it alone at the kitchen counter. The house creaked with emptiness. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was my granddaughter, Lily. Or rather, Lily's Instagram story. A photo of her in a red swimsuit, laughing under the sun. Beach day with the fam. I blinked. Then came anothermy's son, shirtless, holding a coconut drink. My daughter-in-law, her sunglasses pushed up into her hair, beaming as she leaned against him. Behind them, turquoise waves crashed onto white sand. I stared at the photos for a long time. The phone grew heavy in my hand. My heart did too. They hadn't gone on a work trip. They'd gone on a vacation. And they'd left me here too, watch the house. I didn't cry. I boiled water for tea instead, though my hands trembled. Sat by the window and waited again for a text, for an explanation, for anything that might lessen the sting of betrayal. Nothing came. By afternoon, neighbors passed by, waving cheerfully. I smiled back hollow. Later, Mrs. Green next door knocked, offering me a slice of her banana bread. "House is quiet," she said. "The kids away?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just for a bit." She chatted a while, then left. I didn't mention the beach photos. Somehow, speaking it aloud would make it worse too real. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the quiet, thinking of Lily building sandcastles, of my son laughing with his wife, of the sun warming their backs. And I wondered, was I really such a burden? So forgettable that they could lie to my face? The days crawled by. I watered the plants, fed the cat, cleaned the kitchen twice. My world shrunk into a series of small, silent tasks. The only sound was the ticking clock and the occasional chirp from my phone, never from them. On the third day, I got a voicemail from my doctor's office. Routine results. Nothing urgent, but it reminded May had a life before all this. Before I became the old lady upstairs. I looked in the mirror. My reflection stared back, weary-eyed and sunken. My husband used to say I had a fire in me. A sharp wit, a quick tongue. But years of being told to sit down, hush, be patient, it had dimmed something inside me. Until now. I opened my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for, just something, anything. Then I typed, "Senior travel groups near me." I didn't expect much, but there it was, a flyer for a weekend bus trip to the mountains. For seniors. Affordable. Scenic. A place I'd always wanted to see, but never dared to mention. I stared at it, and something shifted. The next morning, I packed a small bag, left a note on the kitchen table. "Don't worry. I'm watching something else now, me own life." And I walked out the front door, locking it behind me. The bus ride to the mountains felt like a secret I had kept too long and was finally letting go. I sat by the window, my fingers gripping the faded strap of my purse, my heart thumping not from fear but from the strange, unexpected feeling of doing something just for myself. Outside, fields stretched wide, the sun dancing across golden crops. I watched towns roll by, unfamiliar houses and people living lives I'd never touched. For the first time in years, I wasn't background scenery in someone else's story. Across the aisle sat a woman in her early 80s, her hair wrapped in a floral scarf, knitting something red and soft. She caught me looking and smiled. "First time?" she asked. I nodded. "You?" "Oh no. I've been running away since 1972. She laughed, eyes twinkling. Her name was June. A widow like me, a mother too. But unlike me, she never let the world convince her that aging meant fading. She traveled, took classes, painted watercolors, danced alone in her kitchen. She said all this like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What are you escaping from?" she asked gently. I hesitated. "A lie." She nodded, not needing more. That weekend in the mountains, I breathed differently. I hiked short trails, watched the sunrise paint the valley in fire and gold, and ate warm soup with strangers who talked to me like I mattered. I was silent most of the time, but it wasn't the kind of silence that hurt, it was the kind that healed. By the time I returned home, something inside had shifted. The house looked the same when I came back. The cushions fluffed, the fridge humming, the dishes stacked exactly as I'd left them. But I was no longer the same woman who had stood here waiting. I climbed the stairs to my room and unpacked slowly. My phone buzzed. A message from my son. Back tomorrow. Everything okay? I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed, then erased. Typed again. Yes, I'm doing fine. Hope you enjoyed the beach. No reply. Not for hours. That evening, the door burst open, laughter echoing down the hall. Sand clung to their shoes, sunscreen still fresh on their arms. Lily ran in first. Grandma, I brought you a shell. She hugged me tight, the way kids do when they don't know any better. I held her close, breathing in the sea salt still on her hair. My son followed, holding bags. He looked tired, sunburnt. Hey, Ma. Sorry we didn't call. Reception was bad. Of course, I said. My voice even. My face, unreadable. He avoided my eyes. At dinner, they spoke in bursts about the seafood, the sunsets, the parasailing. I nodded, smiled politely. No one asked what I did while they were gone. No one noticed the faint sunburn on my own neck, or the mountain brochure peeking from my purse. Later that night, when the house quieted, I sat on the porch alone. The shell Lily gave me rested in my hand. For so long, I'd lived as if their approval was a necessity, as if being needed meant being loved. But love shouldn't feel like being forgotten. And now I wasn't waiting anymore. Over the next weeks, I began to change in quiet ways. I started going to the library again, took long walks before sunrise, joined a storytelling group at the community center. I said yes when June invited me to a watercolor class, even though I'd never held a brush in my life. And something curious happened people noticed. At the grocery store, a young cashier complimented my scarf. At the park, a teenager asked if he could sketch me for his art project. At the senior center, a man named Thomas asked if I wanted to dance slowly, carefully, like we had all the time in the world. And when I laughed that day, really laughed, I remembered the woman I had been before I became someone's mother-in-law, someone's grandmother, someone's invisible housekeeper. Back at home, things were changing too. Subtle at first. My son began to knock before entering my room. My daughter-in-law started asking if I had plans before expecting me to babysit. And Lily, sweet, curious Lily, began to ask real questions. Grandma, where do you go with that paint set? I showed her a small canvas of the mountain sunrise. Her eyes lit up. That's where I want to go someday. You will, I said. Maybe sooner than you think. We painted together that afternoon. Her strokes were wild and bright. Mine, slower, steadier. But for the first time, we weren't just family, we're women sharing something of our own. It wasn't perfect. There were still days I felt pushed aside. Still times I sat through dinners where no one listened to me speak. But I no longer swallowed that pain like medicine. I let it pass through me, like wind through trees. One evening, my son sat with me while the others were out. You're different lately, he said. I hope that's a good thing. He nodded. It is. I think I just got used to you always being here. Always helping. I know, I said. But I'm still here. I just needed to help myself too. He looked down. I'm sorry, Ma. About the beach. We shouldn't have lied. I let the silence stretch. I know why you did. You didn't want guilt on your towel. He winced. We were wrong. I reached out and touched his hand. It hurt. But I forgave you the moment I saw those photos. You did? Yes, I said. Because they reminded me I still had places I hadn't seen. Weeks turned to months. I started organizing small weekend trips for seniors in the neighborhood. We called it Silver Steps. Our motto, it's never too late to take the first one. We laughed, we stumbled, we discovered. Some of us fell in love with landscapes. Others, with life again. And a few, like me, finally fell in love with themselves. Sometimes, I still sat on the porch in the quiet, the shell Lily gave me resting in my palm. I kept it as a reminder not of the lie but of the moment I chose to walk out the door and reclaim my own story. I wasn't just someone who had been left behind. I was someone who had moved forward. Autumn arrived quietly. The trees turned gold and auburn, their leaves drifting like soft reminders that even nature knew how to let go. I found myself walking more through parks, through town, through memories. My cane clicked lightly against the pavement, but I didn't mind the sound. It reminded me that I was still moving, still here. One afternoon, I passed a travel agency window. A poster caught my eye. Venice for the Golden Years, Senior Cultural Exchange. It showed a woman with white hair, laughing in a gondola, the canals glimmering behind her. I stood there longer than I meant to. I'd never been to Europe, had never even considered it. Foreign cities were for the young and reckless. I was too old for new languages, unfamiliar currencies, cobbled streets. Or so I told myself for years. That evening, I mentioned it over dinner. Venice, my daughter-in-law blinked. That's across the world. I know. But don't you need a visa or shots or something? Probably. My son cleared his throat. You'd go alone? I looked at Lily, who was spreading butter on her bread with too much concentration, pretending not to eavesdrop. I wouldn't be alone. The agency sends a guide. It's a group of seniors. And I'd like to see it once before I can't. They didn't say yes. But they didn't say no either. And that was enough. 3 weeks later, I stood at the airport with a new suitcase and trembling hands. June had helped me fill out the forms, choose clothes, even lent me her neck pillow. You're braver than me, she'd said. I never crossed an ocean. I wasn't sure if it was bravery or quiet rebellion, but either way I was doing it. The flight was long and exhausting. But when the plane descended over the sea, and I saw the maze of water and rooftops sparkling beneath the clouds, I cried. Venice was more than I imagined. Every turn revealed beauty not polished, not perfect, but worn and alive, like me. I rode a gondola and laughed so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I got lost in alleyways and didn't panic. I ate gelato at midnight. I even danced with a man named Paolo, who told me my eyes reminded him of his late wife. When I sent Lily a postcard, I drew a little gondola at the bottom. She replied with a photo of her smiling beside it on the fridge. Grandma's cooler than TikTok. I kept that message in my wallet. Back home, things had changed. Not drastically, but deeply. My absence had left a space. They had learned to fill it themselves. The laundry was done. The cat fed. Lily's school lunches packed. The house hadn't burned down. And somehow, their world hadn't collapsed because I wasn't there to prop it up. But more than that, I saw something in their eyes when I returned, a flicker of awe. A new respect. I hadn't just watched the house. I'd lived. One evening, Lily climbed into bed beside me while I was reading. Grandma, can I ask something? Of course. Were you ever scared? When you went away alone? I closed the book. Yes. I was terrified. She looked surprised. But you did it anyway? I nodded. Courage isn't the absence of fear, sweetheart. It's moving forward while holding its hand. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to be like you. I kissed her forehead. You already are. You just don't know it yet. In the spring, I started hosting storytelling nights at the community center. People came young, old, in between. They listened. They shared. They cried. They laughed. And sometimes, they told me they saw themselves in my stories. One young woman hugged me after a reading. My grandma raised me, she said teary-eyed. But I never listened to her stories. I thought I had time. I held her tight. Write them now, while you still remember her voice. That night, I realized something profound. This wasn't just my redemption. It was an invitation for others to reclaim their own voices too. But not everything was warmth and wonder. One evening, I found a note slipped under my door. You're gone too much. Lily needs stability. We're not sure this is working anymore. No signature. But I knew. It was her. I held the paper in my hands for a long time. Then I walked downstairs. She was in the kitchen, stirring soup. I got your message, I said quietly. She froze. I didn't mean it like that. But you wrote it. She didn't meet my eyes. I just think maybe this arrangement isn't good for anyone anymore. You're barely here. You're always off doing something. I know, I said, because I finally remembered I exist. The words hung heavy between us. I'm not trying to hurt you, she whispered. But you are. She sighed. It's hard to explain to Lily why you're always leaving. Maybe because she's starting to understand what it means to live a full life. We stood in silence. Then she turned off the stove. Maybe it's time you found your own place. And there it was. Not anger. Not cruelty. Just detachment. Like she was finally cashing in on a debt she thought I still owed. That night, I packed a small suitcase not out of shame, but peace. This was no longer a home. Just a space that had outgrown me or I had outgrown it. Before I left, I slipped a letter into Lily's desk drawer. You are loved beyond measure. Never shrink to fit someone else's comfort. And never, ever stop painting the world in your colors. Then I stepped into the night, the cool air brushing my skin like a blessing. I stayed with June for a while. We drank tea and told ghost stories, and she taught me how to cook something Italian that neither of us could pronounce. Then I found a little apartment, one bedroom, tiny balcony, yellow curtains that made the morning lights sing. I bought a rocking chair, hung Lily's drawing on the fridge, started writing a book, not a memoir, but a story about a woman who stayed home to watch the house and realized, far too late, that life had kept going without her. Only this time, she didn't let it end that way. There were days when loneliness came knocking, quiet but persistent. It would arrive with the rain, tapping against the window pane like memories I hadn't asked for. I'd sit in my little apartment, a cup of tea cooling in my hands, wondering if Lily still read the note I left her, wondering if she understood. The silence was different here. It didn't carry the weight of unspoken expectations. It didn't demand I fill it with service or sacrifice, but it did echo sometimes, and in its echo, I found grief for the years I gave away without asking for anything in return. But grief wasn't the same as regret, because now I had something else too. Freedom. I began waking up early, even earlier than before, just to watch the light change on the walls. Sometimes I'd walk to the corner bakery and chat with the girl behind the counter, a college student who reminded me of myself before life hardened the edges. She called me Miss M, and I called her Sunshine. On Wednesdays, I taught a creative writing workshop at the senior center. At first, only 3 people came. One was deaf, one didn't know how to spell, and the third kept writing letters to her dead husband. But by the end of the second month, we were 10 strong, and each person had something worth saying. One man wrote about the war, another about losing his sister in a fire. One woman, nearly 90, wrote about the garden she was forced to leave behind when her son moved her into a condo. She cried while reading it aloud. And so did we. There's something sacred about telling the truth when no one ever asked for it. One afternoon, I got a letter. Real paper, real pen, my name in Lily's handwriting. I unfolded it slowly. Dear Grandma, I miss you. I put your postcard from Venice in my diary. Mommy got mad when she saw it, but I told her it's mine, and I'll keep it forever. I want to go there too one day. Dad doesn't talk about you much, but I think he's sad. I heard him in the garage once. He said, I didn't know she had dreams too. I think he meant you. I drew you another picture. It's you in a red boat, but this time, there's someone next to you. That's me. Love. Lily. The drawing was folded inside, just as she said, 2 stick figures in a red boat. The waves were big. The sky was yellow. And above it, in big purple letters, My grandma goes places. I held it to my chest and wept. I didn't respond with words. I responded with action. The next week, I called a travel agent and booked 2 tickets. Not to Venice, to the Grand Canyon. Lily had once told me she'd only seen it in books. When I called my son to ask permission, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice filled with something I hadn't heard from him in a long time, a humility said, she'd love that. And added, thank you, Ma, for still letting us be part of your life. Lily arrived with a backpack bigger than she was, grinning ear to ear. She held my hand through the airport like I was the one who needed reassurance. Are we going to ride donkeys down the canyon? We might, I laughed. But only if they let me bring my cane too. The Grand Canyon was beyond words. Even standing at its edge, it felt impossible to believe something so vast could exist. The sky melted into the horizon, and the colors changed with every passing minute. Trust, gold, rose, deepening into purple and shadow. We sat together on a bench, wrapped in sweaters, our breath fogging the air. Lily leaned her head on my shoulder. Do you ever wish you were young again, Grandma? I thought for a while. Not anymore. Why not? Because I didn't know who I was then. But I do now. She nodded, like that made perfect sense. Then, quietly, she whispered, I want to be like you. Brave. I smiled. Then promise me something. What? No matter how much the world tries to tame, you didn't let it. She looked up. What does tame mean? It means making you smaller, quieter, easier to carry. You're not meant to be carried, Lily. You're meant to soar. We returned home with sunburned cheeks and windblown hair. But something between us had changed. Not just between me and Lily, but between me and the life I had left behind. My son came to visit my apartment not long after. He brought flowers, the cheap kind from the gas station, but I didn't care. He hugged me tight, longer than usual. I read your book, he said. I blinked. How did you? Lily showed me the manuscript on your desk. I stayed up all night reading it. I felt exposed, like he had seen into parts of me I wasn't sure he deserved anymore. But then he said, "You're a damn good writer." I laughed. Language. He smiled. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see you." I touched his cheek. "You were busy being seen." "That's okay." Later that week, my daughter-in-law came too. She stood awkwardly in my doorway, holding a pie she hadn't baked. "I wanted to say sorry," she said. "For everything." I didn't say anything. Not yet. I think I was scared of what it meant if you changed. It made me wonder what I'd missed out on in my own life. Finally, I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on my couch, hands folded tight in her lap. "You were never the problem," she whispered. "But maybe I was afraid you'd become a mirror." I sat across from her. "And what do you see now?" She looked up, eyes rimmed with red. "A woman who refused to be erased." I nodded and said, "Then maybe it's not too late for either of us." That night, as I stood by my window watching the city lights flicker on one by one, I thought about the day they told me to stay home. How I did, but only for a moment, and how that moment had birthed the rest of my life. Spring melted into summer. By now, the little apartment felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. The curtains I hung danced in the breeze each afternoon. The scent of basil from the windowsill plant filled the air when the sun was high. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. No one needed me to prove my worth anymore. I had already done that by living. The book was finished in early June. 200 pages. Not just stories of aging, but of awakening, of remembering what it means to be a whole person, flawed, fierce, full of contradictions. I titled it simply, While They Were Away. June was the first to read it, of course. She laughed and wept and scolded me for making her cry in public when she read chapter 12 at the library cafe. "You don't realize what you've written," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just wrote what happened," I said. "No," she shook her head. "You wrote what happens to all of us, we just forget how to say it." And then she did something unexpected. She submitted it to a small press that published stories by women over 60. I didn't expect anything to come of it. But 2 months later, they called. They wanted to publish it. I sat on the floor of my kitchen, back against the cabinets. The phone pressed to my ear and laughed like I was 17 again and had just been told I could go anywhere, do anything. Because suddenly I could. The book came out that fall. Not a bestseller. Not on Oprah's list. But real. Tangible. Something with my name on the spine. My granddaughter held the first copy in her hands like it was sacred. "You're famous, Grandma," she beamed. "Not famous," I smiled. "Just seen." My son came to the launch at the community center. He stood in the back, quiet, holding a bouquet that Lily insisted had to be fancy. He didn't speak much that night, but the way he looked at me said more than words ever could. And when he hugged me afterward, he whispered, "Thank you for not staying small." That winter, I traveled again, this time to Nova Scotia, where my mother had once dreamed of going but never did. I brought a small photo of her, placed it on a bench overlooking the cliffs, and said a prayer into the wind. For her. For all the women who stayed home and never saw the beach. Then, one morning, just as the frost was lifting from the city streets, I got a letter. Typed. Formal. From a publisher in New York. They had read While They Were Away. They wanted to know if I had anything else in the works. I read the letter twice. Then a third time. And sat very still. Because I hadn't planned to write more. But suddenly, 100 stories buzzed inside me, like bees in springtime. Stories of women, of aging, of betrayal and joy and rediscovery, of how sometimes a lilac, we're going on a work trip, can become the spark that burns through an entire lifetime of quiet resignation and lights something new. That evening, I opened my notebook again. The page stared back, blank and waiting. I wrote the first line. She stood by the window, holding her phone like it might explain why she was left behind. I smiled. It was a familiar line. But now, it felt different. It wasn't the start of my story anymore. It was the start of someone else's. Because that's the thing about reclaiming your life, you don't just save yourself. You make a path wide enough for others to follow. The years that followed moved gently. Lily grew taller, then suddenly teenage and wise beyond her years. She started writing too. Told me one day she wanted to be a journalist like you. I laughed and told her I was no journalist. She said, "But you tell the truth." I suppose she was right. There were losses, too. June passed away quietly one spring night, with her paintbrushes still wet and a smile on her lips. She left me a note. "Don't stop writing, even when your hands shake." Especially then. I read it every time I felt the fear creeping back in. And it did creep in because no matter how far you travel, some shadows follow. But I had learned how to live with shadows. I had learned how to light candles too. My daughter-in-law softened over the years. She even asked me to co-write an article once for a parenting magazine. The piece was called, "Let Your Elders Live: Why Grandparents Deserve More Than Gratitude." I wrote the bones of it. She added her own paragraph at the end. I once saw my mother-in-law as a fixture in our home, a helper, a caretaker, a background presence. I didn't realize I was stealing from her. Not money, not things, but years. Her own years. I know better now. We didn't hug after finishing the article. But we didn't need to. The words had already done the holding. And still, I traveled. I spoke at small libraries, to rooms full of gray hair and bright eyes. I stood on stages and said out loud the things we had been told to keep inside. That aging is not a surrender. That sacrifice is not the same as love. That we are aloedno, intit led to want things. To go places. To be more than who we were needed to be. The last scene I will give you is this. It is dusk. My little apartment is bathed in amber light. On the wall is a shelf with books, some by me, some by others I helped find their voices. The rocking chair creaks as I sway gently, notebook open, pen in hand. Outside the window, Lily's bike leans against the railing. She's visiting for the weekend. Inside the notebook, a new sentence forms. Another woman. Another forgotten life, waiting to be remembered. I smile. And write. Because I didn't stay home to watch the house. I went out to find the world. And found myself instead.